You ever have one of those mornings that starts off so ordinary? It fools you into thinking life's finally decided to cut you a break? That was me, barefoot on my porch, mug of black coffee in hand, watching the mist roll off the pasture like a memory that hadn't made up its mind. For a man in his 50s, retired from fire duty and now calling this little patch of Texas earth his home, peace had become my daily ritual. I'd fought the fires. Now I mended fences, both the wooden kind and the human kind. My dad used to say, "Brandon, the land don't lie. People do. But the land always tells you where you stand." That land had been in our family for 3 generations. My name was carved into the treehouse I built when I was 10. Same one that still creaks in the wind like it's whispering the stories we lived here. And I'll be damned if I let anyone rewrite those stories. So when I heard the banging on the front gate that morning, my first thought was maybe the UPS guy got stuck again on the East Trail. Or maybe one of the goats managed to lodge itself in the fence again. Lord knows they're more creative than most city engineers. I wasn't expecting what I saw. Karen Middleton, standing tall in what looked like a second-hand courtroom dress 2 sizes too tight, holding a folder of papers she probably printed off from Google. She had that same smugness I'd grown too familiar with. You know the type. Lips pursed like they're constantly tasting something sour. Eyes scanning you like a checklist you already failed. Behind her were 2 men pretending to be cops, though they looked more like they'd failed out of a Halloween party. One wore a hoodie with a plastic badge clipped to it. The other had sunglasses on at 7 a.m. The SUV they pulled up in didn't even have license plates. Just rust and duct tape. And the best part? Their radios weren't even turned on. Karen lifted her chin like a prosecutor in a soap opera and said the words that would trigger everything that came after. "This property belongs to my husband now. Move out or face arrest." I sipped my coffee, blinked once, and let the silence stretch out. "You're trespassing," I said flatly, not raising my voice, not blinking again. She smirked, the kind of smirk that says, "You don't know what's coming, do you?" Then came the usual tirade. Accusations of squatting, forged documents she swore were legitimate, references to a non-existent HOA code, 41B, like it was carved on Moses's stone tablet. But I knew better. My ranch wasn't under any HOA. It had been grandfathered in before their little suburban kingdom of beige fences and yoga moms even existed. I stood there, listening, still holding my coffee like it was an anchor. Then one of the fake cops stepped forward, hand resting on what looked like a paintball holster. That's when I put my cup down, calm, deliberate, on the fence post, and said one word, "Leave." And that's when things got weird. The taller one pulled out his badge like it meant something and said, "Sir, you're in violation of HOA code 41B. We have orders to remove you immediately." That's when I knew this wasn't just Karen having a bad hair day. She wasn't just angry. She was dangerous. But what none of them knew was that I had already sent a text. One simple message to my neighbor Jordan. "Need you now." Now, let me tell you about Jordan. Army vet. Quiet. Doesn't say much unless it matters. Runs a private security firm out here, the kind of guy who can scan a room in 3 seconds and know where every exit, threat, and lie is. When my father passed, Jordan helped me bury him. When coyotes took my chickens last spring, he showed up with traps and didn't ask for a dime. And this morning, Jordan was already on his way before I even put my cup down. The ranch gate behind Karen and her crew creaked open, and out came the black Dodge Ram, Jordan's truck. Headlights hit them like Judgment Day. The officers turned around fast, reaching for radios that didn't work, and Karen just blinked like she couldn't process what was happening. Jordan stepped out, calm as ever, wearing a vest that said, "Private Security," in big white letters. He had a GoPro already recording on his chest, and that camera was pointed straight at the circus on my porch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You are being filmed," he said flatly. "This is private property, and you are trespassing while impersonating law enforcement." The taller fake cop shifted his weight. The shorter one muttered, "We should go." But Karen, she doubled down. "Don't move," she barked. "He's bluffing." "Bluffing? Lady, I've pulled people out of burning buildings with nothing but duct tape and adrenaline. You think I bluff? Then Jordan pulled out his badge. Not a plastic toy, not something ordered off Etsy. A real state-issued badge. Licensed in 3 counties. Karen flinched just for a second. Then the wildest thing happened. Jordan said, "The sheriff's on his way," and almost on cue, the rumble of tires cut through the tension like a chainsaw. A second later, blue and red lights painted the gravel like Christmas on acid. The real sheriff stepped out. Darnell Briggs, tall, wide, and built like someone carved him out of oak. He didn't ask questions. Just looked straight at Karen and her men and said, "Face down. Now." I wish I could tell you Karen surrendered gracefully, but that'd be too easy. She tried to run, heels and all. Her stumble looked like a deer on ice. One of the deputies tackled her without breaking stride. The fake cops didn't resist. Karen, once the queen of HOA righteousness, was now handcuffed in the dirt, sobbing into her overpriced sweater, whispering her husband's name like a spell gone wrong. "Greg said it would work," she kept repeating. "He told me it was legal." And that's when I realized something. This wasn't just about Karen. She was the tip of the spear. Greg was the one throwing it. A snake in a suit with a smile too white to be real. Greg was the one who'd made me an offer months ago. $500,000 for my family ranch. When I laughed, he offered $750,000. I told him I wouldn't sell even if he brought $1 million in gold bars. That was when the accidents started. Mailbox knocked over. Fence cut. Dead chickens. Fake fines. He wasn't trying to buy the land anymore. He was trying to break me. But here's the thing most folks underestimate about old ranchers. We've already seen the fire. We've already lost and rebuilt. The worst has already happened to us, and we're still standing. So no, Greg didn't scare me. Neither did his wife, nor her dollar store enforcers. But what chilled me that morning wasn't their audacity. It was how close they came to making it real. If Jordan hadn't shown up, if I hadn't been paying attention, I might have been in jail. Or worse. Later, when the sheriff pulled me aside, he said, "Brandon, I've been watching that couple for months. You did the right thing." But even then, even with them in the back of a patrol car, I knew it wasn't over. Not even close. Because an hour after they left, a manila envelope showed up in my mailbox. Inside, a civil lawsuit. Greg Middleton suing me for $2 million for trespassing, emotional distress, and interference with development. And taped to the envelope, a gold-embossed business card from something called Monarch Holdings Incorporated. No return address. Just 5 words printed beneath the company name. Power respects power. Always. I looked out across the pasture, the morning sun stretching over fields my grandfather had plowed by hand, and I clenched that card tight. This wasn't just a feud anymore. This was war. Not with bullets. With paper. With lawyers. With shadows. And me? I don't scare easy. I'm too old, too tired, and too proud. They came to evict me with fake badges. I'll show them what it looks like when a man defends not just his home, but his history. You want to know how far I'll go to protect what my father left me? Stick around. You haven't seen anything yet. You ever wonder when exactly a man crosses that invisible line, when a neighbor stops being a nuisance and becomes a threat? Because if I had to pick the exact moment Greg Middleton went from smiling real estate snake to something far more dangerous, it wouldn't be when he made his insultingly low offer on my land. It wouldn't even be when his wife brought fake cops to my gate. No, it happened 2 weeks after that circus on my porch, when I walked out to feed the horses and found a drone hovering over my stables. Silent as a mosquito, camera pointed right at me. I stood there with a scoop of oats in my hand, watching it buzz like a nosy fly over the barn roof, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something hot crawl up my spine. Not fear exactly, but awareness. The kind of feeling you get when you realize someone's not just trying to bother you. They're watching, planning, waiting. I didn't wave it off or chase it. I went inside, poured myself another cup of coffee, and made a call to Jordan. He showed up that afternoon with a black duffel full of gear and installed 4 motion-activated cameras around the property. plus a jammer for future drone visitors. They're probing, he said flatly, trying to map something. This isn't about curiosity. It's reconnaissance. I don't know about you, but when a former Army intel officer tells you someone's planning something on your own land, you listen. And that's when I realized I was already in a war. I just hadn't accepted it yet. A few days later, a woman I'd never seen before came up the gravel path in a minivan with tinted windows and no plates. She parked right in front of my gate, rolled down the window and called out, "Mr. Walker?" I didn't answer right away. I was standing with a rake in my hand, halfway through clearing the garden. "Depends who's asking," I said. She smiled. It was a rehearsed smile, like a waitress faking interest to get a better tip. "My name is Rhea. I'm with Texas Community Expansion Partners. We'd love to talk with you about integrating your land into a regional development opportunity." I wiped my hands on my jeans, walked over and said, "Lady, I'm not selling my land. You can turn that van around now." She didn't leave. She just handed me a glossy folder with maps, charts, and a 5-year vision that included my ranch paved over by condos, a country club, and something called a culinary arts retreat zone. That's when I started to laugh. I mean, full out, belly holding, can't breathe kind of laugh. Not because it was funny, because it was so absurd I couldn't believe I was living it. "You folks drew up a whole future where my home just disappears?" I asked. "We prefer the word reimagined," she said. "Well, reimagine your way back into that van," I replied, and walked off without another word. They didn't take the hint. The next week, a black pickup truck with contractor logos pulled up near my east field. 3 men got out, all wearing matching high-vis vests that hadn't seen a day of work in their life. One of them even had his phone clipped to his belt like he was playing foreman in a TV show. They started walking the perimeter with clipboards and laser rangefinders like they had a right to be there. I confronted them, asked who sent them, and the lead guy said, "We're here to do a preliminary scan for pending infrastructure upgrades." I asked to see a permit. He said it was filed electronically. I told him to file his tail right off my land. They left, but not before I snapped photos of their plates and faces. Jordan ran those numbers through his network. Turns out one of the men used to work for a land acquisition firm that went bankrupt 3 years ago under investigation for deed fraud. This was no coincidence. This was an operation. What really drove it home, though, was what happened at the town clerk's office. I stopped in to renew the livestock permit, something I've done like clockwork every spring. Except this time, the lady at the front desk frowned when she pulled up my file. "That's odd," she muttered. "Your parcel shows pending reassessment status. And your name, it's got a flag." My jaw tightened. "What kind of flag?" She turned the screen slightly. Next to my name was a red asterisk and a note. "Potential title dispute under review." I asked who filed it. She looked nervous. "It was pushed through a back channel. I'm not even supposed to show you this." I thanked her and walked out without saying more. But inside, I was boiling. They weren't just coming for the land anymore. They were coming for my name. That night, I sat on the porch with a whiskey neat and an old photo album. Inside was a picture of me at 16, standing next to my father in front of the barn, both of us smiling like fools, covered in dirt and sweat. It was the summer we rebuilt the south fence by hand. I remember him saying, "Son, when you build something yourself, you don't just own it, you become part of it." I looked at the barn now, worn but still standing, and I swore right then I wouldn't let it fall. Not to men with papers, not to phony development firms, and sure as hell not to a guy like Greg Middleton. A week later, a package arrived at my gate. No return address. Inside was a USB drive. Jordan checked it first, no malware, just one video file. It was a drone feed, a bird's eye view of my property. But not just one. Time-stamped footage, 2 weeks worth. Whoever sent it had been watching every inch of my ranch. Movements of livestock, when I turned the lights off, even what time I took my trash out. At the end of the clip, the drone panned up to a black SUV parked just outside the property line. The driver? Greg Middleton. The camera zoomed slightly as he stepped out and lit a cigar, staring directly into the lens, grinning. The message was clear. I'm watching you, and I'm not afraid. That's when it clicked. Greg didn't want a deal. He wanted a surrender. He wanted to prove that power wasn't about legality. It was about persistence, pressure, and perception. He was betting I'd cave because I was alone, because I was older, because I didn't have a law degree or $1 million legal team. But he made one big mistake. He thought time had made me soft. He didn't know that old men who faced fire don't bend easily. We may walk slower, but we stand firmer. The next morning, I drove into town with a folder of every piece of paper I had. The deed, the will, the plat map, and a notarized letter from Judge Carter's husband, a friend of my father's, confirming the legacy clause. I sat with the new county assessor, a young woman named Alice who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else but behind that desk. I laid out every document, every time-stamped image, and I said, "You're not going to erase me from your records, because if you try, I'll make sure every local, every veteran, every landowner in this county knows how fast the system bends for men with cash and connections." She looked through the documents, lips tight, then said, "Mr. Walker, I'm not the enemy." I nodded. "Then don't act like one." That night, the power to my ranch was cut. Transformer box at the back of the property. Slashed wires, clearly done by someone who knew what they were doing. But I was ready. Backup generator kicked in. Cameras caught a shadowy figure walking off into the woods. I didn't call the sheriff this time. I sent the footage straight to the state investigator I'd been in contact with since the HOA stunt. And I copied the footage to a dozen USBs, left one at the church, one at the diner, one with Martha at the local paper. You don't just fight men like Greg in court. You fight them in sunlight. You show the community who they really are. And I was just getting started. Because that drone, that van, that phony reassessment, all of it was just the opening act. The real plan hadn't even begun yet. But when it did, when the cement trucks rolled in and the false eviction notices arrived, oh, you better believe I was ready. Because no matter what papers they forged, no matter what names they dropped, they were missing one thing. They didn't have my father's hands on this soil. They didn't have his name carved into that treehouse. They didn't have the history, the sweat, or the sacred silence of a man who never left his post. But I did, and I wasn't leaving mine. They came before sunrise this time. Not with badges or drones, not with letters or lawsuits. No, this time they came with concrete mixers, flatbed trucks, and a smugness thick enough to choke a man. It was 5:14 a.m. when I first heard the low rumble, a mechanical growl echoing across the valley like thunder before a storm. I stepped out on the porch, coffee in hand, boots still unlaced, and there they were. 5 heavy trucks parked in a row at the southern fence line, engines idling, men in reflective vests hopping out like ants from a disturbed mound. One of them climbed onto the bed of a truck and unrolled a long white banner that read, "Perry-approved Site Development Colland Project." I nearly dropped my mug. I didn't yell. I didn't run. I walked, slow and steady, down the gravel path, past the chicken coop, through the dew-soaked grass and up to the gate. That's where I saw him again. Greg Middleton, polished as ever, in a suit that probably cost more than my roof, clipboard in hand, pretending like we hadn't nearly ended up in a federal courtroom weeks ago. "Morning, Brandon," he said, like we were old golf buddies. "Looks like moving day." I didn't say a word. I just stared at him, waiting to see how far this performance would go. "Paperwork's filed," he continued, tapping the clipboard. "County green light the survey. This land's officially under transition review, and under the Choland Trust, we're authorized to begin basic terrain clearing. Don't worry, we'll preserve your little treehouse. Sentimental value and all. What gets me isn't the lie. It's the ease of it." The way he stood there, under the rising sun, pretending like forged documents and midnight arson were just unfortunate misunderstandings, and not part of a deliberate plan to erase everything I stood for. That's what broke the silence. I leaned on the fence post, looked him in the eye, and said, "You think you're going to scare me out of here with trucks and banners? I've fought wildfires with nothing but a shovel and a radio. I've pulled children out of burning homes while roofs collapsed around me. You think a few hired goons with name tags are going to break me? You don't know a damn thing about men like me." Greg smiled, but his eyes twitched. This isn't about fear, he said. It's about progress. Your kind of land ownership, it's outdated. Sentimentality doesn't stand up in court. Market momentum does. I stepped closer. That court date you're hoping for? It'll never come. Because every move you've made has been documented, photographed, and filed under criminal conspiracy. The judge you're banking on? Her husband rode horses with my father. The sheriff? He's seen every blueprint you've tried to bury. And those documents you filed last week? You used a dead notary again. His face shifted then, just slightly, but enough. Enough to tell me he knew I wasn't bluffing. I turned to the workers, most of whom looked unsure, confused even. This land is protected under generational deed. If you cross this gate, you're not just trespassing. You're committing a felony. And you'll end up in the same cage as your fake cop buddies. One of the workers, young, maybe early 20s, looked at Greg, then at me. Then he stepped back, pulled off his gloves, and said, "I didn't sign up for this," before walking off. That was the first crack. By the time Jordan arrived, driving in with his crew in their marked security vehicles, 2 more workers had walked away, one of them filming the whole thing on his phone. Jordan stepped out, body cam already rolling, and nodded at me. "Want me to call it in?" he asked. I nodded once. Let the law catch up to these fools. And just like that, the illusion of authority Greg had built began to collapse again. But he didn't retreat. He whispered something to his foreman, and the man climbed into the first bulldozer. That's when I stepped into the path of the machine. Dead center. No weapon, no badge. Just a man, a rancher, refusing to be moved. The engine revved. The treads clanked forward half a foot. Jordan raised his voice. 1 more inch and that's vehicular assault on private land. The bulldozer halted. Silence fell. The sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the pasture. Greg exhaled hard through his nose and barked. "We're coming back, Walker. You can't stand in the way forever." I smiled for the first time. I don't need forever. I just need long enough to expose every hand you've shaken and every law you've bent. And believe me, I'm not the only one watching anymore. He left that morning, tires spitting gravel, his little convoy trailing behind like defeated dogs. But the war didn't end there, because that night someone cut my internet line. And when I went to check the outdoor utility box, I found a warning sign etched into the side with a knife. Just 3 words. "You're next, OLD man." Not the most creative threat, but enough to keep me up that night. Shotgun across my lap, eyes scanning the treeline. But they underestimated something. See, fear doesn't grow the way they think it does. For men like me, men who've buried brothers in firehouses, men who've outlived friends and lost family, fear turns into resolve, into grit. And while they were busy cutting wires, I was calling in favors. Jordan brought in drone footage from a neighboring property that showed license plates of Greg's trucks. Martha from the county paper published a full expose on HOA fraud across the state, featuring my ranch as the headline case. A veterans advocacy group picked up the story, then a landowner protection network, then local radio. And just like that, the narrative shifted. I wasn't just some stubborn old man anymore. I was a line in the sand, and that terrified them more than anything else. A few nights later, a car pulled into my driveway after dark. Not blacked out this time. An old Buick, engine wheezing, headlights flickering. I approached with caution, hand on my hip. Out stepped a woman. Older, maybe late 60s, wearing a church dress and trembling like a leaf. "You don't know me," she said softly. "But they tried to take my house too. Same company. Same fake deed game. But I don't have the strength to fight. I saw you on the news. You made me believe someone could stand up." I invited her in. We talked for an hour. I showed her how to document everything, who to contact, which agency to trust. And by the time she left, she wasn't shaking anymore. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about saving my ranch. It was about lighting a damn beacon. Greg's mistake was thinking land could be stolen quietly. That old men would just nod and bow out. But this old man? He grew up on soil soaked in sweat and memory. And when men like that stand their ground, they don't move. They make others retreat. The first time I truly saw the face behind the curtain was the night the drone flew over my barn. It wasn't loud. In fact, it was almost elegant, like a hawk gliding low before a kill. But it wasn't from Jordan's crew. And it sure as hell wasn't from any friendly neighbor. I was out back, replacing a busted plank on the west fence when I heard the soft hum, a whirring so faint it blended with the cicadas. I squinted at the sky, and there it was, sleek, black, no blinking lights, hovering right above the barn that we had just rebuilt. It paused there like it was thinking, then tilted and zipped off over the ridge. 30 seconds of flight, that's all. But I knew what it meant. They were watching me again. Only this time it wasn't Karen or Greg or their cheap muscle. This time it was someone who could afford silence, who paid for subtle. That night I went to the fireproof lockbox beneath my floorboards and pulled out the file I'd been saving for something exactly like this. Inside were copies of everything: HOA threats, video stills, the senator's recording, Karen's handwritten confession, and something else no one knew I had. An unsigned agreement between Monarch Holdings and a shell trust called Fairwood Acquisitions, offering Greg Middleton a silent partnership in exchange for voluntary yield of ranch properties located within strategic rural corridors. That was the language. Strategic rural corridors. Makes you want to throw up. I never signed anything, but they assumed I would. People like them always assume old men fold quietly. But not this time. Next morning I drove to Waverly. Not to the courthouse, not even to see Martha at the newspaper. I went to the oldest diner in town, Patty's Place. Back booth, third one from the window. The unofficial war room for every Vietnam vet, ex-sheriff, and volunteer fire captain left in our county. I laid the files down on the checkered table between the coffee mugs and asked one question. You boys ever hear of Monarch Holdings? A man named Earl, World War II vet, knees shot to hell, looked up from his eggs and said, yeah, name came up when they tried to buy my brother's orchard out west. Funny thing is, his lawyer couldn't find a single human name tied to the deal. All just initials and P.O. boxes. I nodded. They're here now. Tried taking my land through Greg. Failed. Tried again with drones and threats. I think we've got a network on our hands. That's when Buck, an old railroad man, chimed in. You mean like a land cartel? Worse, I said. Like a private army with a real estate license. Earl leaned in. You want names? I nodded. And that's how the list started. Not from police reports or whistleblowers. From veterans and retirees. From the people no one notices because they stopped yelling years ago and started listening instead. And what they heard, what they told me, painted a picture uglier than anything I imagined. It turns out Monarch had been quietly sponsoring revitalization grants in small Texas counties for nearly a decade. But none of the projects ever got finished. Instead, land got acquired, stripped, then sold, sometimes to overseas buyers, sometimes to companies that didn't exist 2 years later. One man, a retired surveyor named Jim, pulled a folder out of his trunk showing how 3 adjacent properties in neighboring counties were rezoned without public vote. And every one of them had a paper trail that ended at Monarch. And guess who sat on the rezoning board for 2 of those counties? Our friend, Senator Denton. I took all of it, every printout, every name, every witness, and brought it to Jordan, who looped in the FBI again. But this time we didn't wait for agents or warrants. This time we played offense. We organized a meeting, small, quiet, invite only, on the ranch under the rebuilt barn beams. 35 people came. Farmers, widows, veterans, even a young Hispanic family whose grandparents had owned their land since 1919. Each one had a story. Each one had been targeted. And by the end of that meeting, we had a pact. We'd form a land defense coalition, document every threat, and file joint complaints to the Attorney General's office under one name, Land Watch Texas. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't fast. But it was ours. We drafted bylaws, pulled in a retired paralegal from Round Rock, and by the end of that week, we had enough documented cases to crash the county clerk's inbox. That's when Monarch blinked. I got another unmarked letter, slid under the door in the dead of night. Same gold lettering, same silence. But this time, it had 2 things I didn't expect. A cashier's check for $1 million made out to me and a single sentence typed on white paper. Last chance to make peace. Everyone has a number. I burned the check in the fireplace. Not because I couldn't use the money. God knows I could. But because if I took it, that's all I'd ever be. A number in their column. A win on their ledger. And that morning I gave a speech to the group. They think they can buy silence, I said. But the land remembers. It remembers hands, blood, sweat. It remembers families buried in its soil and names carved into tree bark. You can't buy that. You can only steal it and hope no one fights back. That got applause. Not loud but strong. The kind of applause you hear at funerals and battlefields. Firm, steady, sacred. But Monarch wasn't done. A week later, someone hacked the Land Watch Texas website. Wiped everything. Files, testimony, addresses. Gone. Then one of our members, a young widow named Lena, found her livestock poisoned. Her goats, dead by morning. And that's when I realized we weren't just dealing with criminals. We were dealing with terrorists. Domestic, corporate, invisible. I called in a favor from an old friend, ex-CIA, now working freelance cybersecurity. He traced the hack back to a network housed in a law firm in Austin. Same one that filed Greg's fake deed. That was enough. We brought it all to Judge Carter, who authorized a state-level investigation with jurisdiction across 3 counties. But before that could even begin, I woke up one night to find my front porch on fire. Not the whole house, just the porch like a warning. Jordan put it out before it spread. We didn't call the fire department. We called the press. Martha came back out, this time with a camera crew. I stood on that charred porch, black soot behind me, and told the truth again. They want to burn us out. But we're still here. We'll always be here. Because they don't just want land. They want silence. And that's the one thing they'll never get. That clip went viral. Not because of editing or music or media spin. Because people saw a man standing on ashes and refusing to kneel. And suddenly, Land Watch Texas wasn't just a local group. It was a movement. Calls came in from New Mexico, Arizona, Florida, even Montana. All the same story: shadow companies, fake HOAs, silent seizures. We put together a national map, connected the dots, and what we found chilled us all. Monarch wasn't alone. There were dozens of them, other groups, other names, all connected through trust funds and real estate holding firms. But Monarch was the kingpin, the final gate. And now, with the public watching, with our documents stacked a foot high, we had them cornered. But the moment you corner power, it strikes back. Hard. The next chapter wasn't going to be about evidence. It was going to be about survival. And I knew the real fight hadn't even begun. Because when truth rises, money panics. And when men like Greg and Denton fall, the shadows they served start to crawl into the light. That's when the war gets real. And I was ready. It began with a knock. Not the heavy-handed thudding of cops or the hesitant tap of a neighbor, but a slow, deliberate rhythm. 3 knocks, a pause, then 2 more. The kind that announces someone who knows they're not welcome but comes anyway. I opened the door, and standing there, under the porch light still scorched from the last fire, was a young woman I'd never seen before. Early 30s, sharp suit, dark hair in a tight bun. No badge, no clipboard, just a plain leather folder clutched in her hands. "Mr. Walker," she said, her voice smooth as river stone. "I represent Monarch Holdings' Legal Affairs Division. My name is Iris Kane. I believe we have a mutual interest in ending this conflict peacefully." I didn't speak. I just stepped aside slowly, motioning her into the living room. Let the wolves walk into the house. It's easier to keep an eye on them that way. She didn't sit. Just opened the folder and laid it on the coffee table. Inside were 2 documents. One was a formal offer. $2.5 million for the land, retroactive to the date of my father's death, plus legal immunity for all parties involved in historical title disputes. The second, a non-disclosure agreement the size of a phone book. "You'll walk away a free man," she said. "Debt-free, safe, untouched." I leaned forward, looked her dead in the eye, and said, "Safe men don't build legacies, ma'am. They just survive." That made her flinch, not visibly, but I saw the smallest twitch in her jaw. "You know this isn't just about a ranch anymore," she said. "This is bigger than your memories." I smiled. "Good. That means when it falls, it'll make a louder sound." She left 10 minutes later without shaking my hand. But she left the folder behind, like it was bait. I threw it in the fireplace. Flames took to it like it had been soaked in gasoline. But even as it burned, I knew something had shifted. Monarch had stopped hiding. They were coming out, talking face to face, which meant one thing: they were getting desperate. I met with Jordan that night in the barn, our rebuilt war room lit by a single hanging bulb. We went over the security logs, checked footage, ran satellite scans of the nearby roads. And that's when we spotted it. An SUV parked off the main trail behind the tree line, engine cold, windows blacked out. It had been there 3 nights in a row. Same spot, never moved, not even a tire mark in the mud. "Someone's keeping watch," Jordan said. "Or waiting." We decided to push back. Next day, we sent a letter to every media outlet that had ever contacted us, offering exclusive footage, documents, and access to Land Watch Texas' internal map. Names, dates, victims, all cross-referenced. Martha Sims helped us package it. And when we hit send, it was like lighting a fuse. Within 48 hours, the story had made national primetime. CNN, Fox, even a late-night host made a crack about HOA cartels stronger than the mafia. That kind of exposure, it doesn't just embarrass people. It enrages them, especially people with money on the line, especially people like Monarch. That's when the digital attack started. First, my personal bank account was frozen due to a suspicious wire transfer that never happened. Then, Land Watch Texas donations were flagged as fraudulent by the online payment processor. Someone had filed a fake IRS complaint. Then came the smear campaign. A blog surfaced claiming I had been dishonorably discharged from the fire department, with fabricated witness statements. Another said I had once brandished a weapon at neighborhood children. All lies, of course, but they were seeded on enough platforms to start gaining traction. I knew the playbook: discredit, isolate, overwhelm. So we pivoted. Instead of defending, we attacked. Jordan and I filed a FOIA request for all land transfer records tied to shell companies under Monarch's umbrella. We looped in state legislators who had grown sick of HOA abuses and were eager for a platform. And we launched a public whistleblower portal where anyone in the country could upload documents, videos, or stories about land seizure attempts. Within a week, we had over 3,000 submissions. Monarch's web of silence had finally torn open. That's when they struck back physically. I was returning from a supply run in town when I noticed something strange. A glint in the gravel near my front gate. I got out and looked closer. Buried beneath a thin layer of dirt was a small metal box. I opened it. Inside, a dead rattlesnake, coiled, mouth open, fangs removed, and a piece of paper that said, "You're rattling the wrong cage." I didn't call the sheriff. I didn't panic. I just walked inside, boiled a pot of coffee, and wrote a letter. It was short. To Monarch Holdings: "You don't scare me. You shame yourselves." But truth is, I wasn't unshaken. That night, I sat on the porch with the shotgun again. Not for myself, but for everyone who had sent me their stories, who had trusted me to hold the line. I felt their weight in my bones. Felt my father's voice in the wind whispering, "Hold fast, son. The land doesn't lie." The breaking point came 3 days later. Not from an attack, but from an email. It was a scanned document from a woman in Arizona. Her grandfather's land had been seized after a fake HOA was created posthumously using forged documents signed years after his death. Same notary name used on my case. Same address trail. Same lawyer. This wasn't coincidence. This was a system. And we had proof. Judge Carter reconvened a special panel. Federal prosecutors joined. Martha published the full investigation on a front page that read, "The Land Theft Syndicate. Inside America's Silent Real Estate War." Within 24 hours, subpoenas were flying like hornets from a kicked nest. Monarch's headquarters in Dallas was raided. Bank accounts frozen. Charles Denton was arrested at his second home in Aspen. And Greg Middleton? His plea deal was revoked after footage surfaced of him orchestrating harassment from jail using a contraband phone. But the most satisfying moment came in the courthouse lobby. Karen walked in, eyes clear, clothes plain, holding her daughter's hand. She looked at me and nodded once. No words, no makeup, just truth. She testified under oath, implicating Denton, Greg, the HOA board, and a dozen lawyers. But the final blow came not from court, but from the people. Retirees, veterans, widows, young couples, they marched, they wrote, they showed up. The movement had outgrown me, and I was glad, because this was never just my story. It was theirs. It was yours. The man reading this, sitting on his porch with coffee gone cold, wondering if it's too late to fight back. It isn't. They came for my land. They failed. They came for my name. They failed. They came for my peace, and I refused to sell it. And now they know men like me don't run. We root deeper. We stand taller. We fight quieter but longer. And when the fire burns, we rebuild in the same soil. Because some things are worth defending with everything you've got. Especially when the wolves wear suits and call it progress. Especially when your roots are carved into the land like names in oak. So if they come for yours, don't wait. Stand up. Speak out. They don't own you. They never did.